Hi, third graders. I have our last Easter book today, but before I read your book, I want to bring your attention to the fact that Easter week is coming soon, and we start celebrating Easter a whole week beforehand. So today's Friday. In 2 days will be Palm Sunday, and that is the day that Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. And people put down palm branches and coats and things like that for him to ride into Jerusalem on a donkey, and that is called Palm Sunday. Okay? And then on Wednesday of that week is the day that Judas decided to betray Jesus for just silver, for money. He decided to betray his loving Savior for money. And if you remember, in the thorn bush, there was a coin that fell down to beside the thorn bush, and that was representative of when Judas when he realized what he had done and he threw his money down. That was representative of that time. And then on Holy Thursday, right before Sunday, before Easter, on Holy Thursday, that's when the Last Supper was, where Jesus, you see a painting a lot of times of Jesus and all of his disciples around the table, and that's the last meal that they had together. And when he ate that last meal with them, he said, because he gave them bread and he gave them juice or wine, and he said, "This is my body for you. Do this in remembrance of me." He gave them a piece of bread. And then the same thing with the wine. He said, "This is my blood. Do this in remembrance of me." And that's where we get our communion from. That same night, he goes and prays in the garden because he realizes this is going to be hard. He's like, "Not my will, God, but yours." But he knew it was going to be hard. And that's when the soldiers came and took him. And so then on Friday was the day that he died on the cross. And we call that Good Friday. And then Saturday, Holy Saturday, sometimes I've had friends before that do not speak or just make it a very, very quiet day because they're mourning when Jesus died. But then Sunday, of course, is the Resurrection Sunday, which is what our entire faith is built upon, because Jesus rose from the dead. Okay, so I'm going to put my board back and pull it forward. So just give me just a second, and I'm going to read for you the story of Benjamin's box. Oops. Hold on just a second. When you're a one-man crew, you just kind of gotta be patient. Okay, so this is the story of Benjamin's box, and he has a very special box which he fills with treasures. Okay, and each of those treasures are going to relate to the Easter story. Okay. Long ago, in a faraway land of Palestine, there lived a little boy named Benjamin. His small, humble home was nestled into a wall of other houses, almost hidden on a narrow back street in the bustling city of Jerusalem. Benjamin loved Jerusalem because God's temple was there. More than that, Benjamin loved God. His grandfather had taught him many things about God when he was just a tiny boy. Benjamin talked to God a lot. He whispered prayers each night at sunset, and in the morning, he always gave thanks for the new day. Benjamin's parents worked hard weaving and selling cloth, but their family was still quite poor. So Benjamin helped out by taking odd jobs around the city. Everyone in Jerusalem seemed to know Benjamin. They could always count on him to be honest and to work hard. One bright spring morning, Benjamin sat outside in the sunshine, and in his hands was a wooden box. "Hi, Benjamin," called his friend Eli. "What's that you've got?" "It's my treasure box," said Benjamin. "My grandfather gave it to me. He said it was very, very special." Eli opened it and looked in it. "There's nothing in it except for some straw. How can this be a treasure box?" Benjamin shrugged. "I don't have any real treasures yet, but my grandfather said this straw came from the bed of a baby who was born in a stable. My grandfather was a shepherd then, and he and the baby would grow up to be, and he said that the baby would grow up to be a king."
Why would a king be born in a stable with cows and donkeys? Eli laughed and closed the box. I heard some sort of king is coming today. His name is Jesus. Want to come to the city gate and watch for me? Sure. My grandfather took me to hear a man named Jesus once. I like to listen to him. Now here's Palm Sunday. Crowds were already lining the street. Some people cut palm branches from trees and handed them around. Others laid garments on the street like a carpet. Wow, said Benjamin. He must be a king. The two boys squeezed through just as a donkey entered the gate. That's him, Benjamin pointed to a man on the donkey. That's Jesus. Hosanna, Hosanna, cheered the crowd as they waved their palm branches in the air. Hail to our new king, yelled an old man beside Benjamin. Why does a king ride an ordinary donkey? Asked Benjamin. The old man turned. It means he comes in peace. Jesus has come to set us free. Hail, King Jesus. Benjamin looked into Jesus' face as he drew near. Jesus smiled back as if they were friends. The donkey plodded along and Benjamin followed, pushing through the crowd to keep up. At last he drew close enough to pet the donkey. A small tuft of fur came off in his hand. That night, Benjamin placed the bit of donkey fur in his treasure box. The coin. In the next few days, Benjamin and Eli went to hear Jesus whenever they could. One day, as they waited, Eli whispered, The priests have offered money for someone to betray Jesus. Why? Asked Benjamin. What has he done? He only speaks the truth. They should listen to him. The priests are jealous of him. They want Jesus to stop teaching, said Eli. Someone should warn Jesus, declared Benjamin. I'm not afraid. I'll go. He pushed through the crowd until he reached one of Jesus' friends. He tugged on the man's sleeve. Excuse me, sir, are you with Jesus? Yes, I am, the man answered. Please, I need to warn Jesus. He's in danger. The priests are offering a bribe to betray him. You must tell... Shh, said the man. Do not repeat this. I'll take care of it. And he slipped a coin into Benjamin's hand. Thank you, kind sir. What is your name? Judas Iscariot, said the man as he turned away. That night, Benjamin tucked the shiny denarius into his treasure box. Do you think that Judas took care of it? Judas was the one who betrayed Jesus. The next day, Benjamin was asked to help his aunt get ready for unexpected guests. They would be coming for Passover dinner. He went right to work carrying water jugs. And let me just interject here. Passover is the celebration, if you remember when we talked about it, when the Israelites were escaping from Egypt, when Pharaoh finally got frustrated and said, okay, let my people go, and then they put the blood over the door, and then they were spared, and then Pharaoh said, okay, let my people go, and then they left. That's the celebration of Passover. And a lot of people still celebrate Passover today. Did you hear the guest of honor is Jesus, said a servant girl. Benjamin's eyes opened wide. Imagine, to serve such an important man. He must work hard and do his very best. Two of Jesus' friends came to help, and Benjamin listened as they talked of Jesus. They loved him so much. Soon Jesus arrived and the supper began. If Benjamin listened carefully, he could hear some of their words, but what did Jesus mean when he said that the wine was like his blood and would be spilled and the bread would be broken like his body? It made no sense. Then Jesus said someone would betray him. Benjamin smiled. He wasn't worried. He knew that Judas would prevent this. After supper, Benjamin found a broken cup. He saved it to remember the night when he served Jesus. Later, Jesus and his friends left to pray. Benjamin wanted to pray too. He followed at a distance, watching as they finally stopped in a garden. Benjamin sat beneath an olive tree and broke off a twig. He couldn't hear Jesus, but he knew he was praying. Benjamin prayed too, and as he prayed, he rubbed the twig between his hands. Before long, his eyelids grew heavy, and he soon fell asleep. Loud yelling startled Benjamin. He leapt up in time to see soldiers taking Jesus away. Stop, he cried. You can't take him. He hasn't done anything. Shh, boy, said one of Jesus' friends, holding Benjamin back. What's wrong? Demanded Benjamin. Why are they taking him? They want to question him. Benjamin pulled away. Why didn't you stop them? But the man just shook his head and walked away. All Jesus' friends were gone now. Benjamin saw the smooth twig on his hand. Dear God, please take care of my friend Jesus, he prayed as he walked. At home, he placed the broken cup and the twig inside his box. "Benjamin, did you hear the news?" asked Eli the next morning. "They locked Jesus up. Everyone says that Judas Iscariot got a bunch of money to betray him." Benjamin gasped. He had told Judas about the bribe. Maybe this was his fault. He said goodbye to Eli and wandered through the city. What could he do? Was there any way to help? Sounds of shouting made him stop, and then he turned to see an angry crowd. "Jesus deserved that beating," snarled an old man. "That heretic claims to be God's son. He should be stoned," yelled another, shaking a fist. "What's going on?" asked Benjamin. "Did they hurt Jesus?" "What do you know about this Jesus?" demanded the old man. They all turned and stared at Benjamin with angry eyes. "Oh, no, nothing," he stammered. His gaze dropped to the ground, where he noticed a small strip of leather. He picked it up. It was from the whips that the soldiers used. It was wet with blood. He tucked it into his tunic and slipped away. Why would anyone beat Jesus? The thorn. Benjamin continued to walk. If only he could make them release Jesus, but what could a small boy do? He heard loud cries as another crowd gathered at the end of the street. "Hail, King of the Jews!" yelled a soldier at Benjamin, pushed his way past Hail, King of the Jews! Yelled a soldier as Benjamin pushed his way past men and women. And there stood Jesus. Benjamin looked into Jesus' eyes as Roman soldiers threw a shabby robe over his beaten back. He expected to see hatred, but instead he saw only love. Just then a soldier shoved a crown of thorns onto Jesus' head, and another struck him with a stick. Benjamin's eyes filled with tears. Why were they doing this? A few days ago, everyone had called Jesus a king when he entered Jerusalem. Now it seemed like they all hated him. Benjamin squatted down and buried his head in his hands. "Please, God," he prayed over and over, "please make them stop." When he finally opened his eyes, the crowd had moved along. Jesus was gone. He walked over to where they had scorned his friend and picked up a sharp thorn broken from the awful crown. He ran home. His parents paused to hear his story, then sadly shook their heads and returned to their work. Benjamin placed the thorn and leather strip in his box and cried. The nail. "Benjamin," called Eli, "have you heard? Jesus is to be crucified." "No," cried Benjamin. "He has done nothing to deserve that." Eli frowned. "My father says that only the worst criminals are put to death on a cross." Benjamin went inside and sat in a dark corner of his house. He did not want to talk or even think about this sad news, but in his mind he could still see the evil men hurting Jesus. "I must go," he finally said aloud. "If this is partly my fault, I can at least be there. I can pray for him." "Where are you going?" asked his mother as he opened the door. "To help a friend," he said. She nodded and touched his cheek. As Benjamin climbed the hill, he found a large spike. It was like those used by Romans to nail criminals to crosses. He tucked it in his tunic and continued on. 3 crosses stood at the top, but he could not force his eyes to look upon his friend. He noticed a small group of people apart from the larger crowd. He knew they were Jesus' dearest friends. He sat near them and bowed to pray. But the only words that came were, "I'm sorry, God. I'm so, so sorry." The die and the spear, meaning like a dice, or like a pair of dice. Benjamin watched as soldiers gambled for Jesus' clothes. He tried to shut his ears to their crude remarks. Finally, he forced himself to look up. Benjamin looked into Jesus' eyes and saw such sorrow and pain that it cut to his heart. But he also saw love. And like before, Jesus looked right at Benjamin. Surely this was his way of saying that all would be well. Perhaps he could even do a miracle. But instead, the sky turned dark and Jesus cried out, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." The ground shook and Jesus breathed his last breath. Benjamin was stunned. Jesus was dead. As if in a dream, Benjamin heard the people move about. He saw a soldier pierce his friend's side with a spear. People hurried to take down crosses and bodies before the Sabbath began. Soon they were gone, and he was alone. He picked up a stone the soldiers had gambled with and looked in the dark sky. Why had God allowed it? Later that night, he opened his treasure box and placed the nail and the gambling stone inside. He looked at his collection. It had seemed so valuable, and he believed Jesus was the king, but now the strange items only filled him with unbearable sadness. The cloth. "Benjamin," called Eli the next morning. "Come hear the news." Benjamin stuck his head out the window and rubbed his sleepy eyes. "They posted guards at Jesus' tomb," exclaimed Eli. "Some say that Jesus will return to life." Benjamin perked up. "My grandfather told me that Jesus brought some people back from the dead. Maybe it will happen again," said Eli. "But the soldiers say they're making sure people don't steal the body." Quickly, Benjamin dressed and raced to the tomb. Could it be? Could Jesus have returned to life? How he hoped so! But the huge stone remained in place, and the guards blocked the tomb. With dark, scowling faces, they told him to leave at once. As Benjamin walked slowly down the hill, he noticed a bit of white cloth hanging from a small branch. He plucked it off and rubbed it between his fingers. His parents wove cloth like this for burials. Jesus is dead, he told himself as he continued toward home. That night, he sadly placed the cloth in his box. This would surely be the last thing to remember his friend by. He tried to pray, but no words came. He wondered if God even listened. Early the next morning, Benjamin went to the market for his mother. He used to enjoy the crowds in the city, but now they only reminded him about everyone had turned against Jesus. He shuffled along without looking up. "It's a miracle!" shrieked a girl. Benjamin stopped in his tracks and listened. "Jesus has risen from the dead. The stone's been moved." Benjamin turned and ran from the market and up toward the tomb. Could it possibly be true? Could Jesus have risen from the grave? In his heart, he believed it could be. It must be. He ran even faster. Sure enough, the stone was rolled away. He fell to his knees and thanked God. When he stood, he picked up a sharp piece of broken rock. It must have crumbled from the huge stone. With a joyful heart, he marched back down to town. Jesus was alive! In the market, he met a woman who was a friend of Jesus. "I know the good news," he said. "Jesus is alive." "Yes," she smiled. "It's as the prophet said. On the third day, he'll rise. Some of us have even seen him." Benjamin ran home and told his parents. He placed the stone in the box. What a treasure he had now. During the next few days, Benjamin and Eli listened as the disciples shared about how Jesus had appeared to them in various places. Jesus said that all this came to pass so forgiveness could be preached to all nations. "Beginning right here in Jerusalem," explained the disciple. "He said that since we saw all these things, now we can go out and tell others the good news of his forgiveness." Benjamin smiled. Now he understood what Jesus had forgiven him too. And he wanted to share the good news. He ran home and got his treasure box, and he went out into the streets and gathered all his friends. "Inside this box," he explained, "is a great treasure." The children drew closer and listened with excitement. One by one, Benjamin took out each item. He explained how he got it and what it all meant. "And so you see," he said, as he closed the box and looked into their faces, "the treasure is really Jesus. Because of what Jesus did on the cross, we can all be forgiven by God the Father." They all cheered and begged him to tell the story again. That night, Benjamin opened his box one more time before he went to bed. He examined each item, handling them all with love and care. Finally, he placed one last one back in the box. Then he knelt and prayed. "Dear God, thank you for letting me find all these special treasures. But most of all, I thank you for sending me the greatest treasure of all. Thank you for sending Jesus, and help me to be a good servant for Jesus. Help me to tell everyone I know about the good news. Amen." Jesus said, "I'll tell you the truth. Unless you change and become like little children, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me." And that is the story of Benjamin's box. And I encourage you, if you want to gather yourself a little treasure box and collect things that represent the Easter story, what you could do is you could collect those things and you could use those things and share with your family the story of Easter. Remember, on Palm Sunday, let's take a look. On Palm Sunday was when Jesus rode into town on the donkey. On Tuesday was when Judas betrayed Jesus for just a few pieces of silver. On Thursday was the Last Supper, and also when Jesus was praying in the garden. On Friday was when he was crucified on the cross. And on Saturday is Holy Saturday, where everything is quiet. And on Sunday is the day that he rose from the dead. And that, third graders, is the crux upon which our faith is built. Jesus rose from the dead, and he died for you and for me. I love you, and be blessed this Easter as you remember what Jesus did for you.